I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Recently, I tackled my best parts of each Soulsborne game, talking about those moments which I always look forward to in any given playthrough. But what about the other edge of the knife, where I threaten to plunge into a pool of despair at the thought of the worst parts of each Soulsborne game? It's a simple premise. Which bit of the game do I loathe the most? Be it a boss, an area, or a moment. So let's not waste any time, dear viewers. Parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos. And without further ado, my worst parts of each Soulsborne game. Let me know yours down below. First up, we have Demon Souls, a game that doesn't have any standout moments in the negative category. What can I say? The game is short enough to where none of the areas or bosses overstay their welcome. Yes, I actually liked the Poison Swamp, and I hadn't had any true moments of friction in either of my playthroughs. At most, I have some issues with the world tendency and red phantoms in my first run, but who didn't? Then I decided to take another gander at the bosses, and I realized there were two candidates for this list. The Dragon God was my runner-up because I'm still in shock that the first proper dragon in the series was fought via stealth. Given Elden Ring's menagerie of dragons you can fight, I'm glad we advanced enough to give the players the tools to face these monsters. But what separates the Dragon God from my pick for today's list is the runback. The Dragon God's runback is 10 seconds long. It's so easy to get back into the fight, and once you know how to handle him, you can beat him in a minute or two. Nelly Furtado's Man-Eaters, meanwhile, are the exact opposite. Which is funny because I actually prefer fighting them to the Dragon God. They provide a small element of skill when the AI isn't trying to escape the confines of the video game. And I really like the designs and the sound-based magic they use. But that run back, it is tedious and boring. You have to run past a bunch of those creepy cockroach monsters up a tower, and then you have to pray the Mind Flayer on the giant spiral staircase before the boss is feeling kind that day and isn't going to paralyze you. Boss runbacks in Demon Souls are all pretty painful, but if you're facing a fun fight, you don't mind. Because when you're facing a boss fight where it's very easy for you to lose because of the poorly programmed boss AI, or because of the extremely narrow arena, your grace for those runbacks really begins to lessen. For Dark Souls, I can't just say the entire second half of the game, but am I wrong? We're all aware of the troubled development that plagued Dark Souls' backend, culminating in some of the more linear and less interesting areas to take central stage as we finish our Lordran journey. From the dark and dank Tomb of the Giants, which I'd certainly understand if people hate, to the entire Izalith questline featuring copy-paste enemies in the Demon Ruins, a reskinned Demon Fire Sage, and one of the worst boss arenas in the series with the Centipede Demon, which is then followed up by a sea of dragon asses in Lost Izalith, and not even the sexy kind of asses, ending in a puzzle boss against the witch herself. Yeah, I can see why this would be someone's least favorite part of the game. But for me, and this may be a hot take, the least favorite part of Dark Souls for me to replay is the jailbreak in the Duke's archives. I'm already not a big fan of the whole you can't kill Seath fight, especially with how his curse crystals can infect you even after you've died, which is just adding insult to injury. Then you get locked in a giant jail tower without any way to warp out of the level, and you have a momentum-halting sequence that brings progression to a screeching halt. It's actually quite funny because I don't find any of the enemies here to be particularly annoying. The Snake Men we've already dealt with in the past. The Berserkers can attack in groups, but if you're running a strong weapon you can tear them through with ease. And yet, for some reason, I always feel like I'm trudging through a poison swamp whenever I'm forced to play this part. It's just so uninteresting to me. Go down the stairs, grab the key from a chest, head back up to the top and unlock the door, fight a few enemies, make your way to the good part of the level, except you'll have to go all the way back down to the giant cell in the depths of the prison tower after collecting its key, because there's a Firekeeper soul waiting at the back, and I just can't resist upgrading my Estus flask. Other parts of the game are objectively so much worse. but they don't make me feel like I'd rather close the game and do something else for a bit. And even worse, on a randomized playthrough, imagine the Pasaka room filled with Silver Knights and Bone Dogs. Oh wait, I know! For Dark Souls 2, we've got a few candidates to go through. The bosses are woefully spared from my wrath, because 95% of this game's fights, well, they go down like tissue paper. The Ancient Dragon was the closest to making this list. For anyone not in the know, this boss starts out as an NPC, but you can choose to kill him to claim the giant soul that he wields. There are a limited amount of these in the game, but for each you have in your inventory, Vendrick in the Undead Crypt is weakened exponentially. Luckily, you can still kill Vendrick easily with one less giant soul, and I did this on my first playthrough of Scholar. Especially as the Ancient Dragon can two-shot you with almost every attack he makes, while somehow being the least dynamic dragon fight in the franchise, even more so than the Dragon God. Yet he's spared my wrath because there is one in-game sequence that has haunted me for many years, and despite conquering it with ease in my recent playthrough, the scars left behind by my initial experience will never heal. And every Christmas, the PTSD hits because I can't see one of Santa's reindeer without having alarming flashbacks to the frigid outskirts. This optional area in the Ivory King DLC is perhaps the most infamous location from Dark Souls 2 outside of the Shrine of Amana, and every time I get to talk about it, I always do so with a twinge of sadness. I truly think an open area ravaged by a blizzard could be a fun location to explore. Had there been a couple more ruins to guide your path as you go, and a couple less respawning reindeer to attack the player, Frigid Outskirts might have survived being my least favorite area in the game. But as it stands, you can't go more than 10 steps without being assaulted by Rudolph and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen. During my first playthrough, I died to these guys so much that I started to despawn them from how much I had to redo the boss run back, which was enhanced by my struggle against Lud and Zalin at the end of the area. But while I do still dislike their reskinned asses, and I think some of their mechanics are a tad bullshit, they're not the target of my ire today. It's the run back, it's the area, it's the white snow where you can't see shit, and you have no map to help guide you. And it's the fact that they made me hate killer reindeer. I fucking love reindeer, and I'm sad that I just don't love these guys. Hug the east wall, guys, trust me. You get the least amount of deer attacks with the quickest route to the boss, and if you want to explore the rest of the area for items at the few ruins found, Godspeed to you, couldn't be me. Bloodborne is an interesting case, because while it remains my favorite Souls game from a pure aesthetic perspective, and I absolutely love cutting my way through Yharnam, there does come a point in the game when my excitement tends to wane. And for me, these moments come when I have to tackle the nightmare levels found in the base game. These are the Nightmare Frontier, which you can access via the Patches questline or by unlocking the path to the lower lecture building after the Unseen Village fight, and the Nightmare of Mensis, the final area of the base game. The Nightmare Frontier remains my least favorite location in Bloodborne, being the game's designated PvP area, despite not having the space to actually PvP. You like backing into level geometry while fighting beasties and hunters? No? That's a shame. It's also the game's Poison Swamp level, and while it's not nearly as tedious as it's made out to be by the community, I still don't particularly enjoy it. The desaturated color palette makes the whole experience feel dreary, and that's before you get a rock lobbed at your head by a giant, or having your head explode from frenzy because of winter lanterns. Meanwhile, the Nightmare of Mensis feels like the most disconnected area in terms of its theming. The run-up to the main castle is fun, avoiding the brain of Mensis and its frenzy build-up, but from that point on, I feel the level has a major identity crisis, and the design itself is really bland. The giant spider room can go fuck itself, but I'm arachnophobic, so I'm allowed to complain. For me though, it's the room with Murgo's attendants prior to the elevator leading to Mikolash that is my least favorite part. It's just boring. Avoid the gaps in the floor, get to an elevator. There's no interesting visuals or anything particularly nightmarish about the enemies here. I'd argue they look extremely goofy. I wanted to feel a true element of Lovecraftian horror in this zone, and we don't really get that. Then Murgo's Loft, the upper half of the level, is just a giant circle with shadows of Yharnam and some fucked up pigs. I can't help but feel the intricate level design the game is known for was abandoned here in favour of a rather weak gauntlet of enemies. The only interesting part being the Frenzy Bridge that eventually leads you to the brain of Mensis and a Blood Rock. When I compare both these areas to everything that came before them, as well as the DLC Nightmare areas that came afterwards, the dip in quality here is apparent, and it reflects the energy I have when replaying these areas in Bloodborne. For Dark Souls 3, there are 2 points in the game that I don't fully enjoy. The first is the opening portion of the Undead Settlement to the Cathedral of the Deep. Not because the areas are bad per se, they're actually really good, but because I feel the length and scale of them are so vast that they become overwhelming on repeat runs. I made a video on this, my worst features in Soulsborne, so you can check that out for more info, but I didn't want to repeat myself, and there is a second part of this game I hate that tad bit more. It is the Yhorm questline, specifically the path through Irithyll Dungeon and the Profaned Capital. Because unlike what I just mentioned, these areas don't have good level design to save them from being the bottom of the barrel. Irithyll Dungeon is my most hated location in Dark Souls 3 for very good reason. It's got a maze-like progression that doesn't feel as interesting to me as like a Depths from Dark Souls, and has the worst enemies in the game, perhaps even the series. The jailers, who can siphon away your health when they view you. This is such an unfair mechanic that I've ragged on to death and completely ruins the momentum of the area as you have to go into stealth and hide away from the jailers until your HP bar comes back. Just give us a slowness effect, that would have been enough to service the stealth mechanics and it would have worked with the theming of the jailers. And then, as long-term viewers know, we hit the lowest floor, where I like to call this group of jailers the roller disco. They copy-pasted them and said deal with it, there's no skill here, and I hate it with a passion. Then we escape into Yhorm's territory, and it's the most bland location in the game. The Profaned Capital, except it's 2 rooms long and has a tiny optional swamp that most players will miss. You can't call an area a capital, and then have it be this tiny fuck-ass bob of a corridor. Had this area just been an extension of Irithyll Dungeon, which is exactly what it is, I wouldn't be as disappointed in the Profaned Capital. But they gave it a new name, and with that comes expectations that were not met. No other part of the game comes close to the level of disappointment I feel when I'm on this path, and it's why I always do Aldrich first when I reach Irithyll. For Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, I really enjoy this game, I love everything about it, except for when the game asks you to crowd control. I don't think it's built having you fight multiple enemies at the same time, and nowhere is this more focused on than in the 2 fights against Juzo the Drunkard. The first time you face him at the Hirata estate, he's flanked by a ton of regular bandits which you'll need to filter out and slay to make the fight easier. This is because they all have bows and arrows, which can be very annoying when you're trying to fight a big sumo man only to get sniped from behind. At least here you have an NPC who will fight alongside you, providing a great distraction from the mini-boss encounter. It's still annoying every time you die, as you have to re-kill every enemy unless you're extremely confident in your skills, but I can handle it. What I can't handle is the fucking refight during the Hirata Estate revisit, because your friendly NPC has bit the bullet, and now you're facing the same encounter, plus a lone shadow who is just as aggressive as Juzo, and perhaps even more annoying. Now yes, you can use puppeteering ninjutsu to have him fight on your side if you can get the death blow off. I, sadly, suck at this game, so I'm unable to pull that trigger, meaning I have to face both of them. And that is on me, but I still think it's a badly designed gank fight that doesn't raise the difficulty in a fun way. It's just putting 2 very different, very annoying enemies together alongside the army behind them and saying, go on then. It's annoying because this fight is required if you want to face Alfather, one of the best bosses in the game, and it's the one reason why I might decide to skip Alfather in a given playthrough. Juzo ain't worth it. Not to mention, re-killing everything once again is just tedious and uninspired. This isn't Ghost of Tsushima, where you've got the shinobi skills to dissipate your opponents in a crowd. This is a From Software game, and Miyazaki is laughing in his ivory tower as he watches me die to a drunkard over and over again. For Elden Ring, let me remind you about a quote I said earlier in the video. I truly think an open area ravaged by a blizzard could be a fun location to explore. 8 years later, and they still have no idea how to make a good explorable blizzard. The consecrated snowfield is my least favorite part of Elden Ring, and I think for very good reason. To begin with, the area doesn't feel particularly different from the mountaintops of the Giants, which you've just been through to get the Haligtree Medallion from Castle Sol. In fact, this snowy area is worse because the blizzard that encompasses the first half of the zone doesn't let up in the same way as Dark Souls 2's Frigid Outskirts blizzard does. When you're in the snow zone, you're stuck until you find your way out or fall off a cliff and die. Half of the area is dedicated to this system, including a hidden catacomb on the right mountain wall and a wizard's tower. Then you reach the visible part of the zone and you've got the choice of refighting another pair of Knights Cavalry, dealing with the worst archers imaginable in Ordina alongside some really annoying Black Knife assassins, or you can take on any of the hidden caves in the snowfield with reused boss fights galore. Not a single unique fight among them. They brought back Estelle for goodness sake. They plopped a magma worm in a cave. They gave the duelists some rot and said have fun, and they gave a Leonine Crusader one of the most legendary swords in the game. This area was a big secret because of the Haligtree, which is completely fair, but I feel this open world portion should have been just as fun to explore and should have had some new or fresh concepts to play with. It doesn't. It's just an extension of the mountaintops, but without the interesting vertical level design. At most, we get some cool ice spires and a hidden path to Mogwin Palace, but beyond that, you're not coming here to explore the snowfield. You're coming here to skip past and head to the Haligtree, and I just think this open world area fully missed the mark on what made Elden Ring's open world so interesting. I'll happily explore every other zone in this game, including the Lake of Rot, because at least it's a concept. It's fucked, but it's memorable. There's nothing memorable here in the snowfield, and it's a real low point for the game as they cut corners to make ends meet. And that's my list. Which Soulsborne parts of the game are your least favorite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. I want to give a massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. It is $4.99. You get early access to future videos, you get a shout out in the description, and at the end of videos as well. If you're interested in more videos of mine, there are some on screen now, as well as my Blue Sky link. That's my social media of choice, so go follow me there if you're interested, and I will see you next time for another video. Adios!